Right. So let's dive into Azure AI Foundry. So Azure AI Foundry is basically, well, a software as a service of Microsoft that encapsulates all the tools and services with which you can build Azure AI agents or agentic apps. And as you can see here, there's a lot of options that you can use, menu options. And this is typically a place to go if you want to have an overview on what's going on, how many agents do you have. You can do monitoring, as you can see in the middle. So observability is obviously a very important thing because agents run somewhere in a data center, especially when you have autonomous agents. They don't come with an interface. They just sit there and do tasks for you. Now, how can you check what they're doing, what they're up to? This is the place to go. Well, there are fans of Azure AI Foundry Studio. This is the portal. But there are also people that are very relying on code only. So they typically only go to this portal to fetch the AI Foundry project endpoint, which is also what we're going to do in the workshop, and some API keys, or maybe to deploy an additional model, right? So if you, where is my mouse? I think it's here, yeah. So, so if you look at my assets, there is a section which is called models and endpoints. And this is where we deploy models. And I already pre-deployed 2 models in each of your environments. So each team has their own model deployment. In this case, I've deployed GPT 4.1, which we can do for basic tasks. And I have also deployed O3 Deep Research. In the main workshop that we're going to do today, we're going to use GPT 4.1. The other model, O3 Deep Research, I've prepared a lab, which is a sample lab, which you can do yourself at home. Or maybe if there's time, you can do it at the end of this lab. Or maybe we can do it on the second or third day. Very interesting too, because it does a multi-step reasoning process. Very powerful. And actually, this is also the technology that sits underneath the researcher agent. And the researcher agent, you might recall from the presentation of Sam, is the agent that you can use within Microsoft 365 Copilot, right? That uses the same technology. And this means that you can also build your own researcher agent that does other stuff as well, right? So this is an important section to go to. Also here you can go to data and indexes. Here you can create vector stores. And so a vector store is basically a bunch of documents that you upload to this portal. And then Azure AI Foundry will create a vector index from it. And with this vector index, you basically augment your own data set on top of a large language model. It's not that we're going to ingest those documents into the large language model. No, we augment. And so therefore we don't need fine tuning, because fine tuning is the process of training your own model. And that is typically, only in 5% of the case, I think even less the case, right? And then I think what's quite relevant for the cause of the hackathon is that the model catalog. If you want, you can look for other models. I do want to say that the models that we pre-deployed, you can do basically everything with it. But the 11,000 models can be shown here. So if you click on this link, then you get to the model catalog. And there you see it, right? So here you have some licenses. Those are open source licenses. However, within the open source licensing, you have restrictive licenses and, well, non-restrictive licenses. You need to be careful with restrictive licenses, because if you look at some of the Hugging Face models, for instance, if you build a solution on top of that, the license that comes with the model that you will be using requires you to open source your solution as well. That is how some of these open source licenses work. So please pay attention to that. So that was one thing that I wanted to mention. There's the playgrounds. This is a very interesting section, because here you can really, well, test all the AI services. You can test the models. You can play around with system prompts. You can also test your agent. If you're going to build an agent using code, then you can go to the Azure portal or to the Azure AI Foundry portal, and then start chatting with it and to fine tune the parameters. So there are some technical parameters that determine preciseness or accuracy. And you can play around with that and then test what works best. Other playgrounds include the speech playground, for instance. So I've spent hours to build the avatar of that or to fine tune it. The model got trained in 2 days, but after that we needed to adjust the tone of voice. We wanted to be short and concise. And that is where you use the speech playground for. So we'll have a look and play around, I would say. Then the build and customize section. This is the place where you can build an agent. You can see I've already did, this is my own environment, obviously, and I've tested the workshop a couple of times. This is where you can also build an agent using the portal. So if you, for any reason, are very uncomfortable with using code, you can also go to the Azure portal, to the Azure AI Foundry portal, and create those agents via the portal. So, and also if you click on it, and then you see the agent ID, agent name, a lot of technical stuff, the instruction set that it needs to do. So this is basically telling the agent how to behave and what to do under what circumstances, right? And you give it a goal, you give it parameters, and you can do a lot of things. We'll get to that, right? Also, knowledge. You can add your own knowledge source indexes. I've already explained that. So if you have pre-created some indexes, you can hook it up here. You can give it actions. This is basically tool calling. So you can basically let the agent execute a database query. That's actually what we're going to do. The code interpreter is a special one because it's very good in, interpreting code, obviously. But this code interpreter is also used for the Copilot that sits in Excel, for instance. So if you now have a Copilot license, you go to Excel and you want Copilot to make some analysis or to do you want to use natural language to ask questions about the dataset, then the code interpreter is used to generate all sorts of Python code to get to the results that you're asking for. It does that on the fly. We're also going to pull that into the agent that we're going to build today. So very powerful. Then templates. Well, you have all sorts of pre-built templates. I've created a Github repository with a lot of examples. Once you have done this main workshop, then you have set up your environment variables, which means that you can connect from VS Code to your Azure AI Foundry project. And by that, you can also expand by getting these other samples to life. And I will do a few of them, and then hopefully you can do the rest of them yourself. But these are nice examples. You can go to GitHub, you can clone it, you can do whatever you want. And it also shows which services are used in each one. So that's interesting. This is fine tuning. This is, I think, an option that is not used that much because it's a very, heavy process to go through. And you need to really know what you're doing to train a large language model, right? So please be considerate about that. But it can be interesting in a couple of cases. Now, content understanding, this is a new service here, is where you can basically automate, for instance, the ingestion of invoices. Obviously, OCR scanning and those kinds of technologies those exist already for quite some time. Invoice scanning there are a lot of applications already out there, but content understanding gets to a new level with AI and generative AI underneath it. So tracing, monitoring, tracing tool, if you really want to know what happens under the hood in each step of the process, then you can use these tracing tools. And during a project where we did the delivery of Unilever Food Solutions, we really needed this to optimize speed. Some of the steps within the entire execution took quite some time. And so with these tools, we can really dive into the nitty-gritty detail of the code execution and by that, optimize the flow. And that was also why we decided to choose some cheaper models in some cases. So let's leave it for now. I think govern is also important. You could do all sorts of guardrails. There are some standard content safety filters. So if you're going to deploy a model, which are already done for you, and you could start chatting with it and you can't use abusive language, for instance, then the content safety filter of Azure, the default one, will step in. But it doesn't stop there. You can also build additional content safety filters if you want. Right? You can be very elaborative. And next to that, in your application, you can also create a guardrail agent that even does much more, right? Because in content safety filter, it will not decide how to cope with questions about discounts, for instance. And if I convince the chatbot of a commercial client to give me 100% discount, the Azure AI the Azure content safety filter will not step in. It will just say, okay, if I promised you that, then that's the case. And so that's why you also need additional guardrails. So I think that is enough said about this. Any questions about Azure AI Foundry? We will go into Azure AI Foundry during the workshop as well. All right, so let me get back to my presentation. So I've worked out a scenario. So we're going to build an agent. We're going to explore the concept of AI agents. And we're also going to talk about what is an agent. Well, I think a lot of the things were already covered by Lucas and Pascal. But I think in this workshop, what sets it apart is that you're going to look at the difference between a large language model and an agent. Why would you want to use an agent? And the use case is a fictional company, an e-commerce company that sells camping material, camping equipment. And the specific case we want the agent to do is to analyze sales data. And at this point, you probably think, well, you can just use ChatGPT or Copilot to do this. But well, let's craft a prompt and let's look how ChatGPT or a Copilot would typically answer this question. So if you, for instance, wanted to ask a question like, I work for an e-commerce selling campaign gear, suggest how I can best analyze the sales data. Then it will give a very generic answer because it didn't provide grounding data. The ChatGPT or Copilot doesn't have any tools connected to it. So the answer will be correct, but it will not be the response that you will be looking for, right? You really want the answer to have the actual data to be included. And so that is where an agent comes in. And this is another definition. I think Sam also used one, or Robert Engels has presented some. But at Microsoft, they see an agent as a semi-autonomous software that can be given a specific goal and will work to achieve that goal without you knowing how it actually does that and what steps it comes to take. Because that's the autonomy of the agent itself. So what are we building? We're going to build an agent that will have access to a large language model. And we're going to use simple goals. So we're going to give the agent 3 tools. So you can basically ask questions about sales data. Then it will fetch the data from a database. You can ask questions about, well, can you give me some pie charts, or can you give me a CSV file with the response? So you can also download files. And the third one, that was well, we'll get to that later. So, but you can basically use many frameworks to build agents. And I think a couple of them were mentioned already, like LangGraph, Crew AI, Autogen, Semantic Kernel. And in this case, we're going to use Azure AI Agent Service. And it makes it easier to build agentic apps. All right. So this slide has a lot of animations. Basically, what we are going to do, we're going to enable a Codespace environment. We're going to connect that to Azure AI Foundry, to your own project. And then we're going to create a Python environment with all the dependent packages that are needed to run this application. And then while executing this application, the first step will be to create an agent. And then you will need a thread. And that is the unit of conversation, basically. Then we're going to run the agent. And then this agent will be provisioned with the system prompt. And then, well, when you ask questions, it will basically follow those instructions simply. That is how it works. And then at the end, you can check the run status. And then obviously you can display the response of the chat bot. And so, well, I had to click while I was talking, but you can see here at the bottom, you have an agent. It has instructions. It has a model, in this case, GPT 4.1. Optionally, we have AI search or embedded vector index. Oh yeah, that was the third tool calling. Now I can remember. The third tool calling is calling a vector search knowledge store, which includes information about what types of products does this company sell. So if you want to have information like what types of tents do we sell, then it will use the third tool. It will fetch the information from the document and then will return it. That's basically a very common scenario, right? You want to add your own information or documents and then tie it to the agent, and then you can basically chat with your own documents. And well, there are also other tools. You can connect the Microsoft SharePoint. You can connect the Bing search. There's also a sample in the Github repository that uses Bing search. Because if you want to, for instance, use O3 deep research, well, and you want to analyze a company, for instance, that's something that I do very often for some cloud evangelists. They want to visit the company. They want to run a company analysis. And then this company analysis involves SWOT analysis, competitive analysis, a lot of steps, right? And this is what the O3 deep research model can do very good. But it needs access to internet, right? And the way to do that for an agent in Azure AI Foundry is to connect Bing grounding. And there's one mention here. Bing grounding, the service API, is blocked on the network of Capgemini by Zscaler. So that's why I strongly advise to always start coding in Codespaces, because Codespaces run in an Azure region, right? And we're not violating the rules or something because it runs in an isolated environment. And just for your information, we're also connecting to the group to open up those ports, because Bing routing is typically a very important service to use in combination with these agents. And yeah, of course, you can connect basically anything that comes with an API. All right, so a thread, user message, and then function calling, create message, and then another message, show a pie chart. Well, this is basically what I explained, but I forgot to do. It's as simple as that. So let's get started. So the ones that are logged onto the Azure portal and also has a GitHub account in that same browser session, or maybe on the same laptop at least, then please visit github.com and this link actually. I did not create a QR code because obviously you want to have this link on your laptop, but a little bit of typing, nights of the prompts / Azure AI Foundry. And this GitHub organization, that's what it's called, GitHub Nights of Prompts. It contains two repositories. The Microsoft Copilot Studio, which is taking place next door. So you can also do these labs yourself with the same account that you received, because this account has access to Copilot Studio. But of course, now you're going to dive into Azure AI Foundry workshop. As you can see, it has the same branding, right? So it's really something that we created for this hackathon. It has a lot of information. I'm going to skip these generic things here. And the use case I already explained. You're going to learn. Workshop instructions start here at introduction. And before we're going to dive into that, I first want to show the rest of this markdown page, or this README, because the samples overview will be given at the bottom here. And you can also find them in the file directory by browsing through the folders. But here I've created some of the labs, including the running a local model. So if you want to run Mistral AI 7B v0.2 to be specific, you can do that by running this lab. And then you run a model locally. You don't have to worry about token expenditure because you run it locally. So you don't need to pay for the tokens, battery or the power. So just know that. Another example, a talking avatar. We've shown that during the demo. This is the one that can be used after you finish this workshop. You can go to this lab, and then maybe next time, if you have some time, or maybe at the end of this session, I can show you how to build it, and also how to use vibe coding to create a nice interface. Because these are pre-created labs, right? So easy to follow. But if you really want to create a mockup or an application or an interface, so at day 4 you want to show something to the jury, you can use vibe coding for that, right? We're going to do that as well. I actually created some examples as well. So just use natural language, explain what you want. If it runs into errors, just feed the errors to the agent, to Copilot, and then it will fix it for you. It's that advanced at this stage. When I did it 1 year ago, it wasn't able to do it, but we have passed the hurdle in that way, in that sense, for simple mockups. Don't think about the microservices, big, decentralized, twin data. No, that will be, in 10 years from now, maybe, hopefully. It's okay. Checking the status of each team so far that it can, go to this link. Yep. Okay, let's go to introduction. There might be some repetition of information, so let me check here. AI agent service, I have already covered that. AI agent frameworks, I already covered that as well. think the getting started lab is also including the creation process of the Microsoft account, the GitHub account. You've already done that as well. So that's also a check mark. We have access to Azure subscription. And then we have a link. Open in GitHub Codespaces. So please open that. And if you click on that link, it will take some time for the Codespace to initialize. But that's not the problem, because in the meantime, I can explain what Codespaces is. So basically this repository, this whole repository can be cloned into a compute environment, which is a development environment which can also be running locally on your laptop, right? The typical developer has an IDE like VS Code or Visual Studio, and it will use that on a day-to-day basis to, develop code and to deploy stuff and to make changes to an existing repository, use deployment pipelines to do updates and such. But with GitHub Codespaces, you don't need all the tools to run locally on your laptop. You just use the browser. So you don't need to install anything. And it can run on your laptop without a big CPU or a graphical card even. Just click on the link. And then after a while, you get this menu structure, which is exactly the same, of course, of this one. But it is a clone. It's your own copy. So you cannot do anything wrong. So feel free to just do anything you like. And if you destroy it, just delete your code space and create another one, right? You can have up to 2 free ones at the same time. If you go to your GitHub account, there's a menu bar here. I won't go to all the details of GitHub because it's not a GitHub workshop, but in GitHub, there's a code spaces section, and that is where you see your own code spaces. And as you can see, it has 2 cores, it has 32 gigabytes of RAM, and it is active. And once you're done or your code space doesn't work anymore, you messed up, you only errors. Every now and then I have that, and then I say, okay, let's start over. Then I just basically say, okay, delete it, and then I'm going to recreate one. Or if you're done for the day and you want to pick it up tomorrow, then you can also click here and say stop code space, because then it will not count. And you have a limited number of hours that you can spend each month. And it will be more than sufficient for this workshop. And if you run into the limit, then you can create another GitHub account. I did not say that. But yeah, this is the lab. Is everyone logged onto the code space with this? Yeah. So it's initializing. Yeah. Okay. So let's get to the lab. Let me get back to let's get to this one. And I'm going to open. Yeah, there will be a random name for your code space. Don't worry about that. At one day I had a code space which was named Funky Unicorn. So not sure how that works on their end, but this is so once the code space is initialized, you can review the project structure. So the most important section within that code space is the folder src/workshop. It contains the datasheet. And in that datasheet, there's a PDF file which contains which products the company is selling, which will be used for the vector store. The instructions, and those are the text files that include the instruction set. So we're going to create 3 different agents, one agent with only one tool. Then we're going to add another tool, and then we're going to add the third tool. And for each tool, you need a different instruction set, right? Then main.py, this is the main application. If you run this application, then you will be prompted to enter your user query. That is basically in a terminal. It looks very technical, but that could be a user interface, like a chatbot, or maybe a web element in some application, right? And then some additional files like a sales data, stream event handler. Those are utilities. Those are Python files that are required for a variety of tasks. For instance, if you want to download the pie chart from the agent, then there is some code that will handle that file downloader. That will be part of the utility. You don't need to understand that. So I'm only explaining some of the files, but there's basically only one file where we're going to focus on today. And we're going to do you're only going to modify like 10 lines of code. That's all. right? You don't need to type even. Just checking, how is the lab initialization process going on? I see a thumbs up. Who is not yet initialized? I see 1, 2. But is there at least one person within your group that is fully initialized? Yeah. Okay. So then we can continue. All right. The first step that we're going to take now is to log on to Azure. This in the terminal, and this is a way to connect your code space to your own Azure portal or your Azure credentials. And via that, we can connect this application to Azure. So to do that, we type AZ login. Maybe I need to make this a little bit bigger. And then we use 2 dashes, use device code, enter. And I always use this command with the parameter use device code, because then you can basically go to the browser where you are already logged in with the right user account. And because as a developer, you might have access to a variety of tenants of different customers and Capgemini, etc. And it can be you can get a little bit of an inception experience with the user account switching. So use this method, recommended. Then you're going to copy this link, not click it, copy, and go to the browser where your Azure portal is opened, where you are logged in with the user account that we have provided. So in my case, I go to this portal. I've already done it, but I will do it again. Microsoft device login. Then you need to enter a code. You go back to Codespace again, because the code is in the same response. Copy, paste, and then you will click next. And then you will be asked to provide your credentials. I will use my own account in this case, but for you, of course, it's the account that we have provisioned. And basically what we say, do you want us to trust the Microsoft Azure CLI? And that is obviously what we want. Okay. And then if you get this question, in your case, you will get the question to select a tenant and subscription. I have quite a few, so I need to select the subscription with the name Hackathon CCW, because that is the subscription that is paid for by Global. It's a good thing. Yeah. Talking about cost management, FinOps is obviously a very important thing. In this case, each of your environments is provisioned with a budget alert. And you will all get $500 each budget for the whole team, right? Not per person, per team. So if you run over this budget, we will get an alert, and then we will have to maybe temporarily disable some services. I've also created a policy that prevents the creation process of expensive virtual machines and such, right? There are some virtual machines that cost like $10,000 a day or a month. So we don't want that. People can make mistakes, but I have to make sure that that cannot happen. So enough said about the cost management aspects. Is everyone logged on? There's not really a cost management, but if you press enter, you select the right subscription, then you will be returned to the prompt. And if you're there, we can go to the next step. Because we're going to use Python as the main code language, right? Obviously, you can also build agents using .NET or Java, and there are a lot of examples. However, Python is the most popular language at this stage, especially at IND, where they build a lot of GenAI logic and the data projects. Now, in order to enable Python in this environment, we simply have to create a Python environment. And that can be done in many ways. There are people that do that by the command line, like Lucas. But you can also go to the menu bar here. Then you go to display or weergave. And then you go to the command palette. And then in the command palette, you type Python and then you search create environment. And then I'm going to use Fenf. Then for the Python version 3.13.6 will suffice. Then we're going to give it a name. We're going to install packages. And then in the packages section, select the one that resides in the workshop folder. And basically, this is a typical thing. If you work with Python and you're going to set up a new environment, you always need a virtual environment, mostly always, right? And if you create a virtual environment, all the required Python libraries or packages will be stored in your repository. So you don't need to install it on your system, right? That's a different thing. So this will be virtual, only available to this project. Then this terminal is not yet working with the virtual environment. So we just need to close this one down by throw it in the garbage bin. And then you're going to click on terminal again. So you go to the menu bar, click terminal, and then click new terminal. And now you see here prefix. So if we're now going to run an application that requires packages that reside in the env folder, then it can find it, right? This is how that works. Don't worry about it too much. It's just a way of adding the packages to your application. Now, let's go back to the documentation. As everyone created a virtual environment. And did you all also close down the terminal that was previously open and reopened a new one? And if you have this venv prefix before, then it's good. Then you can follow on for the next step. Now we're going to use Azure AI Foundry to fetch some information. So go back to the Azure portal. And now we are going to Azure AI Foundry within your project. So if you go let's start from where you are right now. So if you go to the Azure portal and this will be your view more or less, you have somewhere an option of resource groups. Does everyone know how to get to your own resource group? Who doesn't know it? Let me flip around the question. Where's Nico? Would you be able to help that team out to get into their own resource group? Maybe Jaag knows? Because within that resource group, I will wait a few minutes. Because we need to go to the Azure AI Foundry portal, to your project, to fetch some information. And we're going to copy that into a configuration file. So who's not yet in this resource group? You should see similar resources as this one, except for, I think, these two by heart. You would at least have an Azure AI Foundry resource and a Foundry project. Who's not yet in the resource group? Which team? Okay. So once you are in the resource group, you can click on your own Azure AI Foundry project resource, which is I think the second item with this strange name, random name. Okay. Because if you go to the Azure AI Foundry portal from this section, you will get immediately to the right blade. You can also open Azure AI Foundry portal, but then you need to browse through projects, and you can get confused quite easily. So if you click on that button, then you will be forwarded to the Azure AI Foundry blade. And then, well, my mouse is exactly at the right spot because I want to click this copy button. And this is the project endpoint, which we need, right? Now go back to VS Code again. And then go to the workshop folder. There's a file which is called .env.sample. And in that file, you're going to replace, and need to make sure that you get everything. You're going to replace that with my project. And then, if you've done that, the project name is actually also part of this URL. So the last bit after the last slash, that is your project name. That's easy because that is a second variable that sits above them. So you can just, that's Apple. Always try to launch additional apps. Then there's also a variable. So these are variables that are required for the application, right? So the application starts, it first needs to know which project do I need to connect to, what's the project name, which models are deployed, and which models can I use. And of course, we also want to point to the right Azure subscription and resource goal. I also could have started at the top, but at this stage, for some reason, I started at the bottom. The agent model deployment name and deep research model deployment name are already set because that is exactly the same in each tenant. So we don't need to change that one. Now for the Azure subscription ID, we need to go back to the Azure port. And maybe you have to click back or you have a second tab open. Subscription ID can be fetched from a variety of locations. It can be fetched from the subscription section. If you are in the resource group, then you see the subscription ID as well, right? This is an ID. This is very common. For some reason, you always need to do a very large GUID. You need a very large GUID to point to your own subscription. They don't use names for that. Those are obviously unique, GUIDs are used. Now, you can copy and paste that in here. Make sure to lose the brackets, right? What is it? What is that a bracket? What's the name of this? The thing? Get rid of it. Then the second name would be the resource group name. That can be fetched here in the dot icons. Copy to clipboard. And then if you paste that, then this file looks okay. Okay. And so below you see some other variables that you can use within the sample labs, right? There's a question. The first step, which is if you go back to the portal and you can always go to the top of this section. You click on this search bar and then immediately you get the offer to go to resource groups. And a resource group is basically a folder within your Azure subscription, right? And a resource group is typically, a logical set of resources that is used for one project, basically, or one application, right? Well, if you have done that, then you can close the file, and then we're going to rename the file because it says now .sample, and we want to enable it as a real .env file. This is basically how it works. Each Python environment works with a .env file where your variables are stored. This is also a file where you can, for instance, store API keys. It's not recommended because typically you would want to store that in a key vault, but you could, right? So now if I would run a script, it will, and you want to use variables, then it will look for the variables in this file, right? So now, after this step, you're going to open main.py. And this file contains all the configurations needed to create an agent and to run it. Is everyone logged on to, did everyone create their .env file? Who does not yet? Okay. We can. Would you be able to help out them? And I'm also looking at time. I want to make sure that we finish this workshop. So, because there are not that many steps anymore. So if you go to line number, so you open main.py, you go to line 79, and you remove the comments. So you remove the first two characters. You can do that with command / on Apple, or you just remove the characters. Right? Yeah. So basically, coding, most coding languages have a way to add comments or text that will not be taken into account as code to be executed, right? And then there's a way also to prepare code, but which not to be activated. And in this case, this is these are the lines of code that we are going to use, but we're going to enable them one by one. So first we're going to enable the instruction file for the function calling. And the function calling, this first function calling, is able to look at a natural language query. So I want to write the sales by region for last year, for instance. And it's a sales question. But it's not a database scheme. So we want to use the large language model to generate a database query that fetches the result that matches my need, my question, my natural language question. That's what this can do. To enable it, we're going to remove the comments. So I'm going to activate that line response. And we also go to activate line agent. You also remove the what is it? Testers. Now that's and a space after it. I'm going to do it old fashioned, so backspace. All right. Make sure to save the file. And then if all goes well, you can basically click this play button, or you can run the debugger, but I typically run this play button. And then it shoots error managing packages. All right, there it is. On the latest. Oh, yes. Same as in Birds, basically. So if you go back to the workshop, because we have executed these steps already. So if you want to do this at home, all the steps with screenshots are there. So it's really, well, elaborative in a way. And then you can go to the, because this is actually what we're now doing, right? So function calling, dynamic query generation, open main.py. So here we are. These are the lines that we just enabled, right? So now it looks like this. After uncommenting, your code should look like this. So toolset.add functions, right? And you can run the app by clicking F5. And this works a little bit different on a MacBook or Windows device, but that is how you run the debugger. But you can also hit the play button. That's also possible. I hit the play button. And now let's check what questions we can ask. So you can use these example queries. So this is the one that I just mentioned. So what were the sales by region, right? Then we go to the application. And if all goes well, it will create the agent. As you can see here, this response includes all kinds of technical things that you might not want to give back to the user, right? But those are things that you will typically leave out in a really rich UI. But for developers, it's very important to know what happens on the hood. So those are lines of code that are appended to the application so that you can see what happens. So in this case, I put in a natural question, in natural language. You gave it to a large language model, the specific instructions to generate a query. This was the query that was generated. Right? As well. Basic as well. So it actually executed query on the database with SQLite, and then it got your results. And the element also was able to format it in a nice way for the terminal. If it was a HTML application or UI, then I would instruct the LLM to return HTML output or the React or whatever. So that's basically how it works. This is the first step. And was everyone able to execute it? Perfect. Yeah. So after that, we go to exit. First, we go to exit this one. If you type exit, then the agent is also deleted again. We added that to the script so that you will have a clean start in the next step. Next, we're going to uncomment the second row. And then also line 91 and 92. And remove those letters. And then we go back to this one. And so you can also test out the other questions, obviously, right? The next one is code interpreter. And I already mentioned that. The code interpreter is able to create files and can do code interpretation. And it also can generate code. But in this case, we're going to use it to generate a pie chart or CSV file. Right? So we're going to uncomment this one. And then we're going to copy this question. And then we go to the runtime again. Make sure that you have saved the file before you execute it. And then we're going to run the query again. And now we're going to add that question here. Show sales by region as a pie chart. Now you see it does execute the query again. So it uses the first two as well. But in the second round, it will create a pie chart. And if it all went well, it should have been created here, but it does not. All right. Let's do it again. Let's download a pie chart or name things by region. Update. Sometimes it behaves a little bit different. It's still a large language model. And well, I think, not sure what happens here, but before the workshop, we did it a couple of times. It worked. But I think I'm going to debug this a little bit more. But if all goes well, then a pie chart is created in this subfile. And it will look like this. For the sake of time, also, you can also ask the LLM to create a CSV file for the information that you're asking for. So yeah, I'm looking at time. The next step would be to go to file search. So just be confident in me that this code interpreter tool will work next week. All right, so now we're going to uncomment this one. And this is basically the last step. Then we're going to uncomment line 95 until 107. And this is the last step. Hope it works. Save the file. I'm going to first exit the running app. And then we're going to run it again by clicking this play button. Right? And now, if I ask the question, what type of tents do we sell? Because that is part of that document, the data sheet here. This is the document that contains all the information of the product catalog. So it should be able now to answer this question. So it creates, well, here you can see, it has packing tents and family camp tents, right? But I see an error with the mapping packages. So maybe something went wrong with my Python environment. Due to of time, I will want to finish this section of the workshop, also in light of time. What you could do here is this icon here is Github Copilot, right? This is one thing that I want to give to you because this is what you can try it yourself at home. Hi, I want to build a simple UI that runs locally in my Codespace. Well, locally, pretty locally. Then maybe it asks for credentials. Then let's do that. Continue with the GitHub. You need to log on. You need to sign in. This message, you won't get that. Now I can close. It's similar to the AZ login actually. Works the same. And then I think my question was lost in translation, but if I ask the question here, I need to enable agent mode. And for this reason, I typically want to go for Cloud Sonnet because it's very good in generating code and making all the changes. Make a nice looking UI for main.py. Enter. It won't succeed at once most times. But in many cases, with some iterations, feeding the errors back to the Copilot, it will make nice shiny UIs and it will also tell you how to run it. So as you can see here, it does multiple steps. It is looking at what's already there in terms of files. This is in Dutch, but you know drills. It also reads the requirements of txt because it might require additional packages. So one way of building web applications is to use fast in Python. Is one programming word. And it now adds those libraries to the requirements .txt file. And as you can see, it's preparing an HTML template, a JavaScript for real-time communication, and CSS for styling. So it changes my files. It also adds an additional application. It adds templates. Let's see what it does next. Static, mostly if you see static folder in it, you give people that typically holds HTML files. So the templates to run your web application. So I'm not sure how long it stays. I'm not sure if you can remain here, but let's see where it heads to. And I have added some. I already said it. I added some samples in the GitHub repo where I show you how I did some vibe coding, and I also added some screenshots. I also show which errors I ran into and how I fixed it by just simply disturbing the agent, feeding it the errors that I ran into. So it already created the index.html. So it's almost there. So, and I guess, do you want to have the closing notes? I mean, I will leave this running. So maybe, closing off this day, it might be running at the end of the session. And I don't need to do anything. Right? I just simply ask one question. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Just like this one. I don't What's break? Roll clean to all line. You will be feeling it on. It's going to work. Better getting it all done. Stay. Mentally. Are they in the line? It's all like shooting. No, not in the skin. You will be. So by 72. And you take everything. And they were they in the line and you came like as you had pictured. And I got in quickly. And I believe So they seem to be the thing. And you're watching the wind through the season. Listen to me. Never go home. Never go. Never go home. Never. Yeah. What you have to mention? Both of you. You have. Again. It's with. Yes. Web. No spread. Go little for long. We can be somewhere. If you know what you're doing. It's nothing. Slide. For the winter. Nothing came. Please, yeah. Keep him things again. And then you and I am doing what you done. We just all promise you them. We'll understand. The least will be wrong. To do this. And do it. It's me. Thank you. And I ended. Thank you. And I am only when you came back. And so much. I'm fine. And we are. I was going to think that. The way in solutions and going. If you're being thinking, you're good. And I ended up saying, and I know when I'm having a night. So